in effect saying that he will press his word and blessing into them so that they are able to bring it to the world during the tribulation. We see this in the Proto-Hebrew, that in the word shafak, meaning to pour, we get this idea that the shin there, the teeth, to press the mouth, the word, the commandment, and then the hand that represents blessing, that he will press in his word and blessing into them so that they are able to take it forward. The word for handmaids or young women is hashivchot, that also means to be humble, that comes from the root shafa, meaning to be bare. It also comes from the root shuf, that means to bruise or to crush, and the word shefifon, that means a serpent. The humble who are willing to expose themselves to harm will be empowered to crush the head of the serpent. Where do we see this idea at the first time? At the transgression in the garden. He says, yeah, you're going to bruise her heel, but she, the handmaiden, is going to crush your head. Okay? So we have to understand that in the tribulation, the elect will not be weak. They will be empowered by Yahweh Elohim to carry out the rescue mission. And I put rescue mission in here for a reason. The rescue mission that will be put into effect only by being empowered by the Ruach of Yahweh will the elect be able to face the hardship that they will face. They will have to be as in the next verse, tribulation begins. So we're getting kind of an eschatology lesson throughout the book of Yoel, and it's telling us a whole lot more about who the elect are going to be, what the elect are going to do, what the people are going to be doing during this tribulation, and how they're going to interact. So here becomes the tribulation. And I will show wonders in the heaven and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. So the word used for and will show is venati, that means to give, to permit, and to dedicate. The word for wonders is moftim, that also means a miracle. Its root word is yafaf, or yafah, that means beautiful. So we can construct an idea that Yahuwah is permitting and dedicating a beautiful miracle. So we have to ask, is this a valid statement in considering the balance of the verse that says blood and fire and pillars of smoke? Does that go with the idea of Yahuwah is permitting and dedicating a beautiful miracle? We might consider that these components are the components of a sacrifice, but let's look a little closer. The word for blood is dam, that according to Yahuwah is what holds the life. Now if we consider the progeny of a father that is Av, and in Av we see what? We see 1 plus 2 is 3, and a mother that we have 40 plus 1 is 41. Together you add them together, it comes up with 44, which is the numerical value of Dam. If we consider that a father and a mother, then we consider it to be a representation of the carnal side of humankind. Fire, Esh, represents the wrath of Elohim. We have wrath of Elohim, then is it really a dedication of a beautiful miracle? If we consider that the phrase says and fire, we have the word ve'esh, then we can consider that this wrath is attached to the flesh or the carnal side of humankind as illustrated by the Vav. That means to attach and is a representation of the flesh of humankind. Everybody with me? Kind of, sort of? Okay. All right. The word for pillars is timarot, that from its root tamar means a palm tree, that is a representation of blessing. And the word for smoke is ashan, that also represents anger or wrath. So with these in mind, we can formulate an idea of wrath and the blessings of anger and wrath coming on carnal humankind. Now, that doesn't sound good, because it seems that wrath and anger coming down on a carnal human being is not a blessing. It doesn't jive. So let's go on a little bit. As soon as I find my place again. Is this idea a valid match for the idea presented in the first phrase of this verse? Yahweh is permitting and dedicating a beautiful miracle. To answer this, we have to ask, has anything changed without Yahweh allowing tribulation to take place? We read throughout the Bible that without it, people either became complacent, or they transgressed, or they went looking where they should not look and transgressed. How many times throughout just the Tanakh do we read about tribulation taking place to change the course of the children of Israel or the world? You know, they weren't even the children of Israel when tribulation came upon the poor folks that decided they didn't want to get in the ark. It was tribulation. Tribulation inside the ark, because you've just lost everybody you know outside of it. And here you are, floating around without faith that eventually it's going to land somewhere. So you have a lot going through your mind. So we ask, has anything changed without Yahweh allowing tribulation to take place? We have this idea of tribulation as something that's been sent to punish the wicked, while the saints are chillaxing up in heaven. Mm-hmm. So before we answer these questions, let's consider the word tribulation. And we'll even use the Greek word for it, since the religious world seems to be convinced that it's the language of Yahweh. The Greek word for tribulation is thalipsis, that literally means to squeeze into a narrow place. The Hebrew word for tribulation is zar, that means to squeeze or to press into a narrow place. The idea that we have here is that olives are squeezed into a narrow place in order to extract their oil, and that oil is used to fill the menorah so that that light can come forth. Oil is going to be, and is always going to be, a representation of truth. So if we take this into account, we can formulate the following idea. Yahweh is permitting and dedicating a beautiful miracle. He is permitting and dedicating his wrath and blessings of anger and wrath coming upon a carnal humankind in order to squeeze out the truth and bring light back into the world. There is a reason that the tribulation has to be there. The church world wants to say that, well, we're not going to have to go through tribulation. You know, he's going to take us up. This sounds terrible. They still celebrate Christmas. They celebrate Easter. They have Sunday, Shabbat. They don't have to keep the Old Testament because it's no longer valid. Is this what Yahuwah Elohim is going to place in the garden? Something has to happen to restore humankind back to keeping Torah according to Yahweh Elohim. The tribulation, the thalipsis, and the zar is very necessary for the restoration of the human condition and of the earth. Only in this can the next verse hold truth. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day of Yahuwah. We've talked about the day of Yahweh. It's a representation of the millennium, the 1,000 years prior to the Satan being released to tempt again. Now, the sun shall be turned into darkness, the moon into blood, before the great and awesome day of Yahuwah. The sun here represents false sun-based Greco-Roman worship. It will be turned to darkness. And the word that's used for darkness in this verse is choshek, that also means obscurity and destruction. It will be no more. And it's interesting that in Bereshit 1:2, when the earth was formless and void, and choshek was upon the face of the deep, the same word for darkness upon the face of the deep was choshek. The moon represents the lunar calendar of the Torah and designates the feasts and festivals of Yahuwah. These will be turned to blood, that according to Yahuwah also represents life. We have a mixed up view of blood. We've been taught forever that blood represents a curse. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that blood is a curse. It always speaks of it as something that holds life. The word for into blood is lidam. Life, dam, will be found in there's the lamed that represents instruction of the Torah. Only the tribulation can bring this to be by restoring truth in the world and, in a sense, crushing the falsehood that is the flesh of the olive in order to extract its oil. Crushing the falsehood of carnal humankind in order to restore its truth. Crushing the head of the serpent. This must happen before the great and awesome day of Yahuwah comes. We cannot enter into the millennium without the tribulation. This is also the day of wrath. And we'll consider Romans 2:1-16. If we consider that good health and sound mind will be restored to everyone prior to the tribulation, then the first words that Paul speaks are going to hold true. Now keep in mind, Paul is, again, he's talking to the southern, or to the northern tribe, but this is going to represent all of us. He says, therefore you are inexcusable. There is no excuse. You're restored to health. You're in sound mind. You don't have an excuse, O man. Whosoever you are that judges, for when you judge another, you condemn yourself. For you that judge do the same things. But we are sure that the judgment of Yahuwah is according to truth against them which commit such things. And do you think this, O man, that judges them which do such thing, and does the same, that you will escape the judgment of Yahuwah? Or do you despise the riches of his goodness and forbearance and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of Yahuwah leads you to repentance? It's a beautiful miracle that the tribulation is going to be allowed. But after your hardness and your impenitent heart, you treasure up for yourself wrath against the day of wrath and the revelation of the righteous judgment of Yahuwah, who will render to every man according to his deeds. Again, the redeemed will keep Torah because it's the right thing to do. Christianity has got this wrong idea about saved by grace. We are redeemed by the favor of the Father. We are restored to whole, but we are still required to keep the works of the Torah. The works of the Torah do not bring us redemption. Only Yahushua can bring us redemption. But as redeemed, delivered, and restored, we are required to keep Torah. Does that make sense? Okay. To them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for esteem and honor and immortal eternal life. But to them that are contentious and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation, and wrath, tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that does evil, of the Jew first and also of the Gentile. All three groups are included here because the northern kingdom was still considered to be Gentiles. You couldn't join the country club of the house of Judah unless you, and there's that word again, it just went out, converted. Okay? But esteem, honor, and peace to every man that works good, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. Again, that's everybody. For there is no respect of persons with Yahuwah. Everybody has to either make teshuvah and go in the right direction or ignore altogether. That's their choice. For as many as have sinned without the Torah shall also perish without the Torah. We don't have to keep Torah. So we don't keep Torah. We transgress, we sin without the Torah, and we will perish without the Torah. Keep in mind, that means gone, totally, completely out of there. And as many as have sinned in the Torah shall be judged by the Torah. Now, those who have sinned without the Torah shall perish. Those who have sinned in the Torah shall be judged. We'll consider that again in the first Psalm. For not the hearers of the Torah are just before Yahuwah, but the doers of the Torah shall be justified. And he goes on, the goal of the tribulation. For when the Gentiles which have not the Torah do by nature the things contained in the Torah, these having not the Torah are a Torah unto themselves. It's amazing that Elohim chose Paul, because only Paul could put out a sentence that makes absolutely no sense and make it make sense. It says, we consider it again from the point of view of the northern kingdom. They weren't allowed to join the country club because they had to convert. And they said, we're not going to convert. They knew who they were. They knew the Torah. But they could not be Jews because they never came back from the diaspora. But they have the Torah. They live the Torah. They understand the Torah. Okay? So they don't have the Torah. They don't have the temple. They don't have all that stuff. But by nature, they do the things that are contained in the Torah. That even though they don't have all that stuff that the Jews down in the southern kingdom have, the temple and the priests and all that stuff, they still recognize that we keep Shabbat. They recognize that we don't eat pork. We keep the Torah. I mean, those are real simple and superficial things. And having not the Torah are a Torah unto themselves. They become the Torah. And that is one of the goals of the tribulation, is that we become the Torah, which show the work of the Torah written in their hearts. What did Jeremiah say? That they will have it written in their hearts. We keep Torah. It becomes a part of us. We are a single living entity of keeping Torah, or living our life according to it. Their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the mean, while accusing or excusing one another. They use the Torah to communicate, to accuse someone or to excuse someone. And if they understand that, then we understand that the Torah prohibits the use of Lashon Hara, the evil tongue. It prohibits us from talking negatively about someone. We can only encourage them and give them constructive type criticism. Now, in the day when Yahuwah shall judge the secrets of men by Yeshua HaMashiach according to my message. So although Paul is addressing the house of Israel scattered throughout the Gentiles, his message is relevant to all of us. This is an illustration of the judgment seat of Mashiach, by which the righteous will be judged prior to the gathering up of the elect. The wicked will not enter into this judgment. Okay? The judgment of Mashiach, in Christian terms, the judgment seat of Christ, is not for the wicked. It is to determine where those who keep Torah, who live according to Torah, are during this revelation period, or during this tribulation period, because that will determine where they go from there. Okay? So we've talked about the beginning of tribulation. We're talking about this judgment seat of Mashiach to prepare people for the next step. But the wicked, those that refuse to keep Torah, are not going to be in that judgment. Everybody with me? Okay. So this is an illustration of the judgment seat of Mashiach by which the righteous will be judged. The first Psalm, 4 through 6, is clear on this. It says, "The wicked are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous." You cannot have people like this entering into the city within the gates. They have to remain outside the gates. "For Yahuwah knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish." That's what happens outside the gates over this 1,000-year period of time. Time continues, but no fruitfulness continues with it. There's no fruitfulness, you don't procreate. If you don't procreate, you eventually die off. Okay? "Therefore the wicked shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For Yahuwah knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish." Now we go on to the next verse. The name of Yahuwah will once again be called upon and not ignored. "And it shall come to pass that whoever shall call on the name of Yahuwah shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those that escape. As Yahuwah has said, and among the remnant those whom Yahuwah shall call." Now, earlier we said something about this being a rescue mission. One of the goals in that mission is to restore the name of Yahuwah. Those that call on the name of Yahuwah will be delivered. The word for call is kara, that also means to cry out to proclaim, and to make known. The word used to say delivered is malat, that aside from delivered also means to be rescued. What are the teachers doing? They're going in to gather up the crops that are left behind so they don't spoil, to bring them into the millennium. They are there to rescue. Okay? In crying out to, proclaiming, and making known the name of Yahuwah, those that do will be rescued. How else are you going to know? How else are you going to know who to pick up? "They will find their way to Mount Zion," that according to the book of Jubilees means Yahuwah has, literally means Yahuwah has seen. "And they will find their escape to Jerusalem, the city of peace. Here they will be counted among the remnant, those whom Yahuwah shall call." And again we have the word kara, that aside from call, and aside from the definitions we listed, also means to be read, to be summoned, and to be chosen. Now we've seen this type of teshuvah and the results of this teshuvah repeated throughout the Torah. But this is the big game. This is the final shebang. We can compare this idea here to what happened in Shemot 32, 25 through 28, where after the golden calf, the whole golden calf thing, Yahweh tells Moses, "All right, tell the people, whoever is with me, they need to step forward. Tell the Levites to get their swords on, because whoever doesn't step forward, you need to go through the crowd and kill them off." 3,000 people died that day. We see again an opposite of this in Maasai, or in the Acts 2, 36 through 41, where after the Ruach is poured out and the 120 in the upper room are empowered, that the 120, that there was 120, takes us back to the story of the ark, and I'm not going to get into it. They were empowered, and they went out and they did what? The first group of people, after Peter said that everyone who calls on the name of Yahuwah will be delivered, that first group of people that were delivered was 3,000. So we see a continuance of this. But like I say, what Joel's talking about here is the end of the game. The helical screw runs out. It's tribulation time. It's, what's the big rock guy on the Avengers? It's clobbering time. Yeah, so this is what we talked about tonight. The balance of Yoel. We're going to consider in our final study. Hopefully it'll be our final study. If not, we will stretch it out again. As the scope of the remaining verses would be beyond the limits of the time that we have for the lecture. In the final study of Yoel, we're going to consider the final judgment of the nations, those who refuse to seek Yahweh and call on his name. We're going to end the study with the remnant sealed in the world to come, and we're going to consider the harsh reality and the end of those sealed outside the gates. We will also, time permitting, consider a true eschatology according to the feasts and festivals of the Torah of Yahuwah. So if we have enough time left over, we'll talk about the eschatology from where we are right now. We just discussed the tribulation. We've talked about the judgment seat of Mashiach. We'll talk about the judgment of the nations. We'll talk about the release of the Satan after the millennium. And then we will talk about the white throne judgment, which is the final judgment for those that didn't quite figure out the fact that you don't listen to what the Satan has to tell you. And then enters into the world to come. But we'll talk about all that stuff and how the feasts and festivals tell us that we're going that way. With that being said, that was our study of Yoel part 15 for this evening. And it was kind of long and kind of wordy, so hopefully it explains some things a little bit. But there we go. And I guess grooviness has been achieved.